welcome to a new episode of BlueDream Radio. This is your co-host, G.
And this is your host, Freedom, and we are here with the Cannabis Noire, Sheena Roberson. She is a cannabipreneur, a cannabis activist, a all-around just advocate for communities of color. And this is one of our it's our 14th episode or something like that for
nice.
For season 2, we have a total of 32 episodes out. So we started a year ago, and we are here now a year later with Cannabis Noire.
This is so cool. Yay! I'm so excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
We're so excited. All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna introduce you a little bit, and then give you a space, Sheena, so you could just talk about yourself, your company, and then we'll jump in from there.
Cool beans.
Awesome. So cannabis has become an essential and integral business for the world, but those who have been oppressed, harassed, incarcerated, and miseducated by the war on drugs are still being left out of the industry. We need organizations to educate, agitate, and organize while giving communities of color the tools to become successful in the cannabis industry. This week, or today, we are speaking with Sheena Roberson, CEO and founder of Cannabis. Is it Noire or Noir?
It's Noir.
Oh, I say Noire. I'm sorry.
No.
Noir. Okay, my bad. Yeah, Cannabis Noire. What's up?
Sheena's an activist and cannabis advocate from Philly. Who created the Cannabis Advocacy Organization to make her community equipped with all the tools necessary to become advocates, activists, educators, business owners, and CEOs in the cannabis space. So sit back, roll up, and let's get higher on BlueDream Radio. So welcome, Sheena.
Yes, thank you. All that. Y'all are officially my intro people from moving forward. Yes, all of that.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and what's the name of your company.
And what your company's about.
I mean, quite frankly, I don't really want to go after that. I feel like if I say anything, it's not going to be as good as that sounds. No, but I mean, that's pretty much it. You know, we are a platform that was, developed out of, I guess, necessity. I always jokingly say, my grandma used to say, necessity breeds invention. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a space for minorities that I saw in the existing cannabis space where I was at, or it was something that I had no idea existed until I stumbled upon a conference that was being held in my city. And for somebody who's very well connected, I've always been a part of social activism, anti-gun and youth violence prevention initiatives, work very heavily, with the Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network, Greater Philadelphia Urban Affairs Commission. I am embedded in social justice and kind of like social services. And I just pretty well connected with things that happen in the city. And I had no idea about this. And as somebody who is familiar with cannabis, or was familiar with cannabis at the time, right? I thought it was strange that I had never heard of it, right? It's like, well, I missed this, how did I miss that? And then I realized, upon going, that it wasn't just me that wasn't there. There were a lot of people who looked like me that weren't represented there. But I also noticed that there were very big conversations happening, right? About the future of cannabis, the industry, money, legalization, like conversations that I felt like people of color needed to be a part of in particular, right? And so I'm like, this is happening right under our noses. Like, they tried to pull the fast one on us kind of thing. Because, there's no way you have this greater turnout in this larger facility. The convention center is the largest events venue in the city of Philadelphia. There's no way that you're filling up that space without marketing, right? And so that tells me that you're just marketing to specific demographics that did not include my people. And so when I got back, I started talking about it and telling people about it and having conversations. And, the more I talked to people, the more I realized that they didn't really know what their rights were, what the legalization was in Philly, how to get registered as a medicinal patient, that they were eligible to be patients at all. I think that was probably the biggest conversation that I had initially, was that like, oh, wait, I would be eligible? Like, a lot of people from my neighborhood and my community who look like me naturally assumed that they just weren't eligible and wouldn't be or wouldn't be considered a medicinal patient. And from that, it kind of grew. The more we realized, how the cannabis industry is, there's so many amazing things that you can be a part of. In the beginning, you're like, I want to do this. I want to be a bud tender, a lab tech. I want to do this person. I want to make labels.
A little bit of everything.
So it was like, I was just so excited that it was just like, we were just plugging into so many awesome people that we were able to offer resources and just connections to these different folks that we were coming across in the space. And it just grew from there. And like 5 people turned into 7,000 people, and now we offer like education and training. We do a lot of networking events, very big on advocacy, and we are currently preparing for National Expungement Week 2020.
Yeah.
So we're very excited. Hey, no! Oh, you outdid me. I should have worn my shirt.
Yeah, we out there.
Yes. I love it.
And out to Pilar, she's the organizer for New York.
Yes.
For the East Coast, I guess. For New York. No, for New York. So,
New York, yeah.
Yeah, for New York. So
shout out. Yes.
Shout out to Pilar.
Awesome. So we have our kind of quote of the day, where we read you a quote from someone impactful in the world, and then we just ask you for your thoughts about it. So this quote comes from Alice Walker, the author. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any.
They have any, yes.
So
that's one of my favorites.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's funny because that's, I guess that's the kind of undertone for the day is that in the cannabis space, I think a lot of what happened was that we didn't realize that, we still don't realize the power in numbers and the amount of leverage we can have collectively if we are constructive about how we want to approach things. And I think in a lot of ways that was more of the goal, is that we wanted to educate people, and we definitely wanted people to understand the medicinal benefit, but we also wanted to get people game ready, like for the industry, right? Like get more players on the field. There's less of an opportunity for you to turn 1,000 of us away than it is 10 of us, right? And so if we can get 100 viable businesses on the line, then there's more of a chance that a Black one will be chosen for this opportunity, or a person of color will be used for this specific service, right? And so when you say, when you use that quote, it's kind of reminiscent of some of the thought process or the focus of our execution in terms of like what our overall goal is, and it's more so to kind of empower our folk to know that they can do this, right? I think there's apprehension and just a lack of knowledge or understanding. It's just like, oh, well, no, just like you're not thinking that you're eligible to be registered for a patient. It just never crossed their mind that they would even be medicinally eligible or that would even qualify for them. So I think for them not seeing a lot of $1 million successful businesses pop up every day in their community, right? There's not a big point of reference. And so from that lack of understanding creates this apprehension and this fear or this assumption that that's just not something that you're able to do or something that you would succeed at. And we're just trying to unravel that myth and make sure that people know that is the worst thing that you can do is to sell yourself short before you get the opportunity to get out there. Yeah. Especially with our return to citizen program members, a lot of them come out very disheartened and very frustrated. And very confused, and it's very easy to mistake a lot of their frustration for combativeness, right? And it's very easy to misunderstand folk.
And for Black people,
99.8% of us. I am a part of it. I'm that last eighth right there. So, so when you have this kind of innate like assumption that you're just not going to be able to do it, it's just another tally mark on the board for them, right? They're counting on that. They've factored that into their projections already, that they see the lack of confidence we have in ourselves in this space and what we can do and what our capabilities could potentially be. So yeah, I love that. I'm gonna put it on Facebook quote.
Yeah, we'll totally copy paste this and send it over to you. No,
yeah,
it's so sure. It's it talks about the industry, but I also feel like now in the time of like the coronavirus, and just like it's such a powerful quote. And I think you look at the structures that are created throughout our society for like people of color, but straight up for like Black people too. It's really like we have so much power. It's just a matter of us recognizing and acknowledging it. And once we do, we have our power in numbers more than anything. And oh man,
and I think that's what people are most frightened of, is that one day that happens and that everything is
now we're gonna realize the power that we have, and it's and we're gonna take over.
Unstoppable.
Be unstoppable. I mean, they beat us so hard over the years with that, but with that hammer, you are worth anything. Like this is the neighborhoods that you are allowed to be in.
Right.
The food that you are allowed to eat. This is the school and the education you're allowed to have. And maybe 2 or 3 of us can make it in the basketball game, or can make it in music industry.
And that's still under my control and my directive. It's not even on So and that's what that's where we are kind of even as we talk about like the cannabis space, and I keep telling them, like, guys, you are the natural cultivators, you are the born creative artists, the
marketers.
It's built into our DNA, right? It's just kind of who we are, right? Like and so the hard part is done. Like, you have all the sauce you need. The hard part is over. That these people have all of the business tools that they need to be successful, but they lack what we have naturally, right? And so a lot of times, we forget. It's like, seriously, like they're paying. Think about how much marketing and branding costs. What is that? What can we do to assimilate their culture to seem more popular, more relatable? How can we resonate better with this demographic? They're spending money to figure out how to spend money to get us to spend money with them, right? How can we make this look more like them? How can we make this look cooler? Which essentially is something we'd already did.
I mean, we set the trends. Every trend that has been put in this earth, we are the trendsetters, And one thing also, like, not just not thinking that they beat us down, that we are not worth anything, but also the people that are, because there's so many Black and Latino entrepreneurs and college graduates and all that different things, but you don't see that on TV. The only thing is to look at the poor neighborhoods, look at these people, they're killing each other, they're selling drugs and all that different stuff. But
the stereotype, right? The
but there's so many of us, and it's funny because I've been, once you start getting into the cannabis industry and like me getting into the youth work and all these different things, the activism, the social justice, all the professionals and all the people that are fighting to create a new narrative of our communities, but they don't show that and on TV or in the news or wherever they showing their stuff.
And that's frustrating too, because that's the part of the whole, like, the misrepresentation and the I purposely misleading branding that they do, right? That paints this picture of what the cannabis industry is, what it looks like, who's successful in it, and what they look like, what success looks like in the space, right? There's all these different exaggerated concepts, right? And it's funny because for us, for us in particular, it's very hard to find images that aren't poorly depicted, right? And then when you get to the cannabis space, it's like, it's either like corner boy, baggy clothes, gang banging, versus like the stoner, camping, white, bonfire, like beach house. And it's, and so it's they're 2 very different movies, right? Very easily. The same plant, same same approach, same reasoning for lighting up, right? And but yet somehow this depiction are so drastically different from each other. But but it's those things that we have to make sure that we are, and that's what I mean, getting us on the field, we're in those spaces. We have to be in those rooms. Just like we talked about social advocacy yesterday, and they were, mentioning how they wanted to make sure that we incorporated everybody. And how can I make sure that people who weren't from my community, who didn't look like me, how can they still help, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, you need to have the conversations with the people in the room that look like you, that won't talk to me, right? And figure out who you can talk to in my community that you can get accurate information for, because if you're putting up basketball courts at a place we don't go because it's a shoot zone now, you've not done us any favors. You've only done it for you and your soundbite, right? And so now when we're talking about branding, you can't accurately depict my culture without having somebody in the room to say, hey, we don't do it like that. That's not what happens.
We don't roll the blunt like that. We gotta do it.
We don't put that in our macaroni and cheese. That's just not what we do. But what we do, right? And when we have somebody, like down to the legal system, we're talking about expungement week coming up. There's people I've had conversations with, they're like, yo, if I wasn't in a room, they literally would have mistaken their slang for a mental defect. Like it was a guy who was like a 3%er. So he's talking like the gods and the earth and his son. And the lawyer literally was like, yo, I don't know what he's talking about. He's, we probably should just take the plea. It's got a mental case. And then this young associate goes in and hands it. She's like, no, he's a 3%er. Those are guys from 125th Street. Like, no, he's straight. But this is what he's saying. Yeah. Without that conversation, though, without that interpretation that you can't get from somewhere else, right? It has to be somebody genuinely from this space, right? Like if you hadn't had that conversation, you sent this boy to jail for no reason. Right. And so now we're talking about, it's way beyond just the marketing and the branding and whether I like the way you put me in your commercial or if there's a speedboat versus a Chinese store in it or not. This is about whether or not somebody's going to jail, right? Whether or not this cop wants to arrest me because the last thing he saw was that image of me smoking in front of a Chinese store versus this white kid on a ski jump. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so it gets really crucial and important to make sure that representation in that space and getting us on the field and game ready is imperative, right? Like that's the goal, right? Having as many people to be in as many different spaces in this industry to help make sure that it's properly everyone's properly represented.
For sure. Could you tell us, Sheena, a little bit about your company and how it was formed? What was your inspiration and wanted to get into the industry?
Like I was mentioning the conference earlier, I thought I was going to a cannabis conference. So I'm like looking for like the joints and like the tools and the accessories. It was like all these white guys in suits. And I was like,
yes.
When I went to the Cannabis Expo in New York, it was the same thing.
So I was like, well, do they have the joints? I'm confused. What's happening here? Are they holding them for us? I don't feel comfortable smoking around these people.
None of them smoke though.
None of these people smoke. They don't look like they're and again and it just goes to show like the difference in our culture. Immediately I was like, I'm not smoking in front of them because my neighborhood, I come from North Philadelphia. Nobody in my neighborhood dare smoke in front of somebody dressed in a 3-piece suit that's Caucasian. No. He's either your lawyer, your parole officer, somebody's judge, or somebody's cop, okay? Like, that's it. They're not even teachers that come in the neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, that's the limit. They stay at school. So it definitely wasn't a teacher. I don't know who that white man was. I ain't smoking in front of him, right? And so, I'm hearing at this space, and I'm like, hey, it was just interesting. And to point out, this is where I discovered Women Grow as an organization. And there were 2 minority women manning that table, and we literally stumbled across them by accident. They were all the way
in the back.
Yeah. Very, very far back left. Yes. I would not have, I got lost and found them. Thank God, right? Because I realized that there was some representation, but it also showed me what they thought of where we belonged in that scheme of things, right? Like, they're down past food and like trinkets and things that are no longer as cannabis centered, right? Like, whereas though Women Grow, probably one of the larger, cannabis organizations in the space, should have been somewhere
in the front
amongst that matrix of other organizations.
They should be like the first one in the front. So the first thing you see when you come in, it's like an advocacy organization that's helping.
You would think.
That's helping people get in the industry, but whatever.
You would think. And so from there, I was like, okay, so they're not trying to let us know. I'm going to go tell everybody. Like, I'm going to go tell everybody. And so, and, you know, people were receptive and for the most part, but I think a lot of it was, you know, there was a lot of apprehension that was like, you know what? That's cool and everything, college girl, but we can't just walk around smoking weed. I'm sorry. I don't, you know, like, and so I had to explain, like, no, you know, like, this is a thing. We can get you registered. Like, let's talk about PTSD. Now let's have the conversation for mental health. And for a lot of ways, it helped me because, you know, I do a lot of like social advocacy work and stuff outside of this. Before, you know, I was in cannabis, this was the work I was doing. You know, we had a youth mentorship program. You know, we had Building Bridges, which was a organization to help young Black men. We worked with the Office of Black Male Engagement here in Philadelphia. So we've always been in that space, but now it's like we had this avenue to kind of have these different conversations. Like, okay, you know, like we might not have been able to get you to talk about PTSD before, but if it'll get you a cannabis card, let's see if you'll have a conversation now about it, right? And it's like, well, you know, I do be stressed. Like, okay, how are you stressed?
Yeah.
Like, tell me. Like, and so now we have this conversation, and it's like, you know, all the things that you were mistaking as you having these flare-ups, or the people that say you're a hothead or you're short tempered, it's actually you being triggered, and then understanding what being triggered is, right? And then recognizing that as not having, because I know so many people who we did a dine and dialogue on PTSD and cannabis in the Black male community. And we had a young man who stood up and said it was much easier for folks to have airbrush t-shirts with rest in peace than to have conversations about what was bothering them. Ooh. And he's a nursing student, and he goes on to say, you know, I just got out of jail and I'm in school, but I can't get a job. And then my kid's mom talks about me because I can't pay the bills or do anything. And I want to go back to, you know, the streets, but I don't want to get caught up, but I don't have any money and I need, and so we're having this conversation with him. And, you know, Black Men Hill is there, and you know, we had some other supportive services there talking about this. And he says, yeah, and, you know, and cannabis really just honestly keeps me from wanting to do something stupid. But it never occurred to him that he had ever experienced PTSD in any way. It never occurred to him that he was depressed, right? It never occurred to him that, yo, I probably should have a conversation with somebody about this, right? Yeah. And so then, you know, we got to have that conversation and talk about how important, you know, self-medicating, and on top of, you know, having the conversation about why we need to self-medicate coupled with it, right? And not just thinking that smoking is the end all be all, addressing the underlying issues, and then figuring out back, you know, we can backtrace from that and figure out what else we need to do to invest in you guys to make sure that you acclimate and reacclimate back into society as healthily as possible. But when you have those conversations like that, and it's like, that's somebody's reality, where it's much easier for you to see yourself as a rest in peace t-shirt than to have a conversation about something traumatic that happened to you as a child, right? It's like, it's heavy. It's really heavy, right? And so for when we talk about cannabis industry leaders and companies and people who are trying to, you know, be a part of social equity and have their social impact statements and investing in communities, this is the type of investment that needs to be made. These are the things that they need to be making sure that they're helping us provide wraparound services for, making sure that these folks have housing, making sure that these people can get education and training in real estate and barbering and things that essentially, like, at the end of the day, you can make a living off of without having a 4-year degree necessarily, right? So it's very heavy, right? And it can be a lot, but it's also very fun, right? It's very exciting because I get to watch these people change their lives, like, and I watch them use what was once something that was blocking them from being successful to be successful, and getting some kind of reparations from the people who are making money off of it, who while they sat in jail for years for no reason. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
Yeah.
Right. Potentially getting, at risk of being sick. And, you can't be 6 feet away from somebody in a prison cell. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just that conversation, like, walking around with the RIP shirt with someone's image on it versus having these hard conversations is also a matter of, changing systemically changing what the norm is, right? So like our norm is, from the time I was born, I'm used to seeing, beautiful murals with like pictures of folks who've been killed, right?
Yeah.
Which has become the norm, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, the artwork is beautiful, but it's still the norm. Versus having really uncomfortable conversations. At one point, having the conversations about people being killed in your neighborhood was uncomfortable, and you just became numb to it. It's like, I think from the perspective of like the school shootings. When Facebook happened, right? Everyone was mortified.
Yes, it's like, oh my God.
Now, like I just saw something
people are desensitized.
Like a GIF or like a meme that said for the first time in over 10 years, there was no school shootings
in the beginning of the year.
And I'm like, yo, it's fucking crazy.
That's so sad.
It's so fucking sad, but guess why? It's because everyone's out, like, tucked away at home. But it's just like this perspective of like, we don't even, like, we see the more provocative ones in the rich neighborhoods, right? So that's what means. But it's so crazy.
It is. And you know what? You'll see the trends of like, I think what is considered like the self-destructive PTSD, where folks are just, like in Chicago, like, I mean, it happens here too, don't get me wrong, but like, it's like it's like 1 minute, 13 years old, they're shooting each other and then broad daylight in front of schools, babies are out, children, and it's like, when it gets to that space, it's like, it's a cry for help. This isn't about you being angry at the person anymore. This is a self-destructive, I can't live with my own stuff thing anymore, right? And the other brainwashing things that happen around that. But yes, so having those conversations and making sure that the industry is investing in the supportive services that help move those projects and those campaigns along are like imperative. So very big part of what we do.
Could you talk to us about what the Cannabis Corp Social Responsibility Fund is?
So one of the things that we were establishing is a fund or a pack of sorts to have folks invest into this essentially fund for our program members and their loved ones and communities adversely impacted by the war on drugs. Through this regular sponsorship or donation, they'll be able to help us support the wraparound services that need to be completed for our reentry program, both pre and post release. So hopefully we'll be able to go into the prisons and kind of do counseling to get them ready to come home, to their families, do counseling with their families to get them ready to receive them, and do things that we can to help best keep them from coming back, or having obstacles that naturally present themselves when you're re-entering the space. Our whole focus is to kind of hold the industry responsible for the adverse impact of the war on drugs, and I know in some cases people have said like, well, we're new, we don't have anything to do with the war on drugs, we're at this company. It's like, you're walking into you're walking into a war, right? Like you've walked into the after effects of a war, right? And so you can't essentially capitalize on this without some type of retribution or some type of investment into the space. It's just the same way. If there's oil companies that, have oil spills, the corporate social responsible thing to do would be to invest into spaces like that will help clean oceans and help prevent this from happening again, right? And that's something that you'll see a trend throughout that industry over time, because nobody wants to be associated with oil spills. Well, cannabis, same thing, right? The war on drugs is your oil spill. And although you may not be the one to leak the oil, you're still a part of the industry that this is where it's coming from.